Welcome back, Tributes, to episode 36 of Into the Arena. I'm Holly.
And I'm Emily.
And today we have a very exciting episode. But before we dive right in, make sure you join us tomorrow night for our tribute talk. We are finishing Catching Fire, our final chapter, and it's also going to be a really exciting night because we got Ballad news. The movie is set to come out November 17th, 2023. So
Yay!
Join us tomorrow. We're going to be talking about it. But that's our short little intro before we introduce to you Dr. Camisha Russell from the University of Oregon. You are an associate professor at the University of Oregon, correct? And you teach a course. The way that we found you is your course, The Hunger Games and Social Philosophy.
Yeah.
So we are so excited to have you. But before we get into our major questions, Emily has some fun rapid fire questions for you.
Yeah, so I guess just to get your framework as a Hunger Games fan, I just have a couple of questions. What is your favorite Hunger Games book?
Mockingjay.
Ooh, nice. Your favorite Hunger Games movie?
Catching Fire.
Nice.
Good choice.
Favorite Hunger Games character?
Katniss, and I want to go so far as to say that's the right answer. That's the correct answer.
Yeah.
yeah, you got to defend it. The most upsetting death, the death that you wish you could just reverse.
Yeah, this was a hard one, but I'm going to maybe do a non-traditional answer and say the District 11 citizen who shows solidarity with Katniss and is rapidly killed by the peacekeepers.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's definitely an emotional one, both in the book and the movie. And what district do you think you would be a citizen of in the world of Panem?
I thought about this too. I think District 4. That's the region that we're in. I'm in, and I think they are relatively privileged, as I also am. But they also have a bit of a rebellious consciousness in the district.
I feel like District 4 is a popular one, and you get to live in District 4, so that's awesome.
Not too bad.
Love the Pacific Northwest. Could you just tell us a little bit about your Hunger Games history, like how you first read the books, how you first got into them, when you became a fan?
Yeah, so I was trying to figure this out last night. I try to remember back in time. I know that I was in graduate school and it was over a winter break. And I know that it was my wife, to whom I was not yet married, who recommended it. And, it's when you're in graduate school, it's very hard to give yourself permission to do anything fun. It always feels like you have all this work you need to do. So it was winter break, and I was like, okay, I think I can read a book for fun, but I didn't know what to do. And my wife recommended this one. She said, it reads really quickly. So I picked it up, and then I read all 3 books over winter break in a very short period of time, because I felt like as soon as classes started again, I would have to stop. So I was like, okay, I've got this period of time and I've got to read all 3 right away.
So I guess, how did you go from being a fan to teaching a class on the Hunger Games? Is it something like you read the book and thought, oh, wow, I could, use this as material in the classroom someday? Or how did that come about?
I don't remember what I was thinking about at the time that I first read them, in terms of future use, but I think, it's always a little bit in my head when anything I encounter sort of eventually tends to make its way into my thinking about things. I finished graduate school, and this is several years later. So this is like 2015. I took a job where they said, do any kind of course, just a dream course, just whatever you think would be really fun. And so I thought, okay, well, I think this would be really fun. I think it'd be really fun to think about the Hunger Games, and philosophy in a class. So I had that sort of freedom to choose sort of just any kind of class, and I thought I would do that one.
I guess off of that, for our listeners, would you mind kind of describing what your class is about, like a brief overview too?
Yeah, so we read all 3 books during the class. That sort of runs parallel to some other readings that we do. So I always figure probably the students get pretty wrapped up and read pretty quickly the books, so then I can assign some slower readings at the same time. But yeah, we just kind of use the stories to think about, different issues of oppression, suffering, and violence. I think I changed this the 3rd time I taught the course. We also look at colonialism, which there's not a lot of actually, there's a fair amount of academic writing around the Hunger Games, but there's not actually anything that I've been able to find that really engages the fact that the districts and the capital are set up sort of along a sort of colonial model in certain ways. And I think this is because the US doesn't think about itself as a colonial power. It sees itself differently than like European countries like France or Britain that held or Spain that held various colonies at various times. But so I think I think it's the idea that it's in North America that prevents, and the self idea that Americans have as not being colonizers, which is not accurate really, but it is sort of part of how we think about ourselves is not as these sort of colonial powers, has left people not thinking about how, in the world of Panem, the structure is this colonial structure. So, there's a capital that is wealthy and that relies extremely heavily on these colonies that surround it for goods and all the things that they actually need to live. So that's one thing that, like I said, around the third time I taught the class, I started talking about that as well. We talk about Appalachia as a site of oppression and resistance. I told you all about this documentary, Harlan County, USA, from but I think I said maybe 1976. It's a really excellent documentary about a coal miner strike in Appalachia. And so I like to also have students think about that. And I think, we spend a lot of time talking about racial justice in general, and I spend most of my time talking about racial justice in my classes, but I think it's helpful for students to also recognize how poor white people were treated and exploited in places like Appalachia and what kinds of resistance emerged there. And I think that speaks to the connections and the solidarities that come up between districts 11 and 12. I think we can think of District 12 as a sort of primarily white district that is in this mode of coal mining and that kind of thing. And then District 11 as the sort of primary agricultural district that recalls slavery and certainly in the movie they and with the tributes are portrayed as Black people. So anyway, so I think that sort of connection is interesting to look at. And so that's one of the reasons I really love that documentary. And then, we think about, resistance and, sort of how that goes in the, sort of second half of the series and kind of how that can arise and be powerful, but also how it can be co-opted and kind of what those risks are. And this is actually the reason that I like Mockingjay best, which I take to be an unusual choice, probably, because it's a very unsatisfying book. I think
it's dark, it's sad, it's depressing.
In terms of the stuff that I think about with my class, I think that dissatisfaction, very limited sense of happiness in the ending, and just that really actually speaks to the reality of these kinds of struggles. They're not without their lasting effects on the people who are engaged with them, and there is a sort of constant worry after any kind of revolution about what will happen and whether a people-led government will be durable or whether you'll have reconsolidation of power under a different leader. So I think that part is a particularly rich sort of area for study and something that we definitely talk about in the sort of second half of the course.
Wow.
That documentary, I was watching it last night and it gave me such a good visual sense, I think, of what District 12 would be like. And so that was really cool for me. It's a lot different than I think when I was reading the books as a teenager, like what I kind of pictured, like this more futuristic dystopia kind of world, and seeing the actual coal mining town and the housing that they lived in and just what the people looked like and how they spoke. I just could get a real sense, I think, of what Suzanne Collins was going for in District 12. So I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to her as an author that that there is, I think, that real depth to what she's portraying, that even if we as readers not familiar with the history of Appalachia and coal mining, if that's not our sort of background, right, can come to realize, oh, wait, she definitely knew this, right? Like, this is not, she definitely understood this and set up this district in this way that, and it, and certainly none of her choices about where these districts are located are accidental, right? They call back different histories of oppression. But yeah, the other thing I love about Harlan County, USA is it's really song is extremely important in it.
Yes.
And again, you might sort of skip over it a little bit if you're just reading the books the first time or something like that. But Katniss talks a lot about how people are always singing in her district, and that's an important part of celebration and their resilience and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's really, really strong connections with Appalachia that, again, I think Collins put in there very deliberately, but I think many of us readers who are not from Appalachia probably miss in the first place.
In a different direction, have you read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the prequel book?
I have not.
No.
I've been hesitant. For me, the series is, the original trilogy is, I don't know if anything's perfect, but it's really pretty perfect for me.
Yeah.
And so I'm always suspicious of prequels. I've sort of held back, not wanting it to. If it disappoints me, I don't want to be disappointed.
Yeah, I can completely understand that.
Have it sort of ruin for me this perfectness of the trilogy. So I've been hesitant. I don't know, with the movie, which is actually going to come out on my birthday next year, apparently.
Oh, happy birthday!
Maybe I'll change my mind. But so far, I've been afraid of it ruining my.
It's a bit of a long book too. I feel like it could have used some editing down. So I'm hoping that the movie just takes it and elevates it. Maybe you'll enjoy the movie and then dig into the book if you like it.
See, I think the reason I brought it up was because we're talking about like music and song in Appalachia. And I mean, I don't know how much you know about the prequel, but it takes place again with a District 12 girl. And that's one of the things I loved about the book was rereading it and going back and learning more about the songs from the original trilogy and kind of their origins, and also just seeing how important that element of song is within the district. So that would be the one reason why I would sway you to read it.
You're slowly swaying.
But the first time I read it, Emily actually knows this, I hated it. But I think rereading it and going back
and discussing it helped.
Yeah, because I was the same way. I was like, do I really want to read something about President Snow? Like, do I really care? But I think a good thing that Collins does is she doesn't make you feel bad for him. And I think that's a really important thing with prequels is you don't want to feel bad for the villain.
For the bad guy, yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely, if you ever get a chance, I just think it would be so interesting to add to your course, because I want to take your course, to be quite honest with you.
Same.
Even just like the crash course of the videos you sent our way and the book are just so fascinating. Which the book that you use for some of your articles you mentioned was The Hunger Games and Philosophy, a Critique of Pure Treason by William Irwin. I went through and I read some of the chapters that I felt, or the essays that I felt would be like relevant to your course. But I was just wondering what some of, in your opinion, are the most valuable arguments from the essays.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I had a stronger sort of emphasis on some of the articles in that book when I first started teaching the course, and over time, my feedback from students was that they really actually preferred to spend more time with some of the sort of non-Hunger Games mentioning, these older philosophical texts, things like, from like Foucault or Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So students sort of said, like, we want to read more of the social philosophy kind of stuff itself, and not as much of these essays. What I think is interesting, and one of the reasons I've kept some of them in, even though students say that, is it gives a sort of sense, I think, for students of how they could use philosophy and the Hunger Games to make an argument, right? So I'd like for them to read some of the essays so that they can think about, oh, okay, this is how you would take a text like the Hunger Games and take some philosophical ideas and kind of read them together. One of the ones I think does that really well, Sometimes the World is Hungry for People Who Care, Katniss and the Feminist Care Ethic by Lindsay Averill. So it's, I think, a really well thought out application of care ethics to Katniss's moral journey. So it talks about how care ethics isn't only about caring about the people around you. It's about, sort of expanding that care to larger circles. And so the author sees Katniss as going on this journey where initially she really cares about her sister and her family, and that's kind of her locus. But then she sort of begins to be able to extend that. So like through someone like Rue and others, who reminds her of her sister. And so she starts to sort of extend, and Peeta. And so she extends who she cares about like further, and kind of becomes a larger circle. And then ultimately that leads her to care more about all the citizens of Panem who are oppressed, and to really think about what needs to happen with the system. Like when she lays down her weapon, when they've just bombed the nut or whatever. To be fair, I haven't read the books in a little bit. I've read them many times, but not.
You're right.
She sort of says, like, I'm tired of, killing other citizens for the capital, right? So I feel like that's when her sort of ethics of care has sort of extended now more broadly to kind of recognizing what all the district citizens have in common in the way the capital treats them and stuff like that. So anyway, that's what the article argues, and I think it's just a really neat example of using the Hunger Games to talk about care ethics, and to really kind of and to use Katniss's moral journey to really kind of explain that concept. So it's just what I think is really it's just really well structured and thought out, and it does a nice job of making that point. So that's one of my favorites. Not because it's my favorite topic necessarily, but just because I think the essay itself is just really well crafted to connect philosophy and the books.
Like, why do I want to write a paper on this now? Because you were talking about that moment, and then I remember the moment where, because that's kind of where she takes it into action. But then there's a moment, we've been reading through Catching Fire, and then there's a moment where she kind of decides to be part of the rebellion, that I kind of noticed that switch of moving from caring for her family and Prim to the broader world, I guess.
Yeah, it also makes me think of Gale, because one of the biggest problems that I have is, like, I don't dislike his character until around Mockingjay, when again they're in District 2 discussing what they should do with the District 2 citizens left in the nut, whether they should let them go free or kill them. And your point just reminded me about how Katniss and Gale have that disagreement with each other, where Gale's like, well, they are with the capital, so we should kill them. And then she's like, well, what about when District 12 was bombed? Like, you wouldn't want that happening again. And so I guess just like a random question is, what are your thoughts on that disagreement, or I guess how Gale sort of contrasts the care ethics aspect with Katniss?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's again, I think one of the things that that reading people talking about this has helped me see is some of the ways that what I think can be unfairly reduced to sort of YA typical love triangle, how Peeta and Gale represent these sort of different ways that that Katniss's conscience can kind of develop, right? Like, so she can go from sort of, again, this really sort of survival focus, and then as she's gaining the power to influence people and realizing that she has this power to influence people, because she's been a tribute, and then a winner, like then she has sort of these options, right, to sort of really call for a sort of really brutal kind of, no holds barred kind of rebellion, or to, Peeta talks about on the rooftop, right, when, before the games, that's to try to preserve something good in the character of people who've experienced this oppression, and not sort of giving that over, and really retaining that against the pressures of the capital to sort of pit them against each other, through these games. That's what I like about about the series, is I think it's very hard to know what it will take for to end the power of the capital, and whether it can be done in a way that sort of preserves some kind of sense of, I don't know, ethical purity, or some kind of ability to really be the good guy. Or whether it will sort of take these tough decisions. And I think Collins really doesn't shy away from that. Like, there's a lot of tough decisions that get taken, and they can be more or less distasteful to us, But by having some of these things happen, some of which we might like and some of which we don't like, she sort of gives us a lot to think about, I think, in terms of what are the consequences of making this choice over that choice. And I think they're not sort of black and white consequences for her either. They're really mixed consequences, like, certain actions accomplish important things, but also, seem really problematic, right? So, I don't think she tries to make kind of any one course of action, like the best course or the right course or the moral course. She really kind of looks at the trade-offs in different modes of rebellion.
Yeah, sign me up.
Did you ever write on Katniss? Because you studied, what was your degree? Women's studies?
My degree is in media studies. I got my bachelor's at University of Colorado. So I pretty much wrote my final thesis project for my undergrad on gender and fandom. And
okay, that's
essentially what I was looking at was more along the lines of like how different people interact in online fandom communities, because I mean, as we're going and like going forward, TikTok is a big thing, Instagram's a big thing, Tumblr was a big thing 10 years ago, just how these different people interact, and also how there are certain, I guess, biases towards people in fandoms and their existences in fandoms. So, I mean, that's what I'm hoping to pursue in my master's.
Very cool.
I'm kind of curious. So the students who take your class, are they usually big fans of the Hunger Games and that's what attracts them? Or are there people who come into your class and they've never read the Hunger Games before and are just curious to check it out?
It's been a mix. Early on when I taught it in 2015 and then again in 2016, I think that most people were pretty familiar with it. But, when I've taught it more recently, as late as 2020, it's actually one of the first courses that I taught remotely. I think that students now have a much different mix. And they also have a sense, originally students had read it sort of like in high school, and now they're sort of like, oh, I remember this from like middle school, right? So it's sort of like it's getting, their memory of when it was a big thing is sort of getting like further back.
Yeah.
And
That's fascinating.
their first encounter with it is getting sort of further back. So, which is interesting, because I think, at whatever age you read something at, you kind of, your age limits exactly what you pick up on, right? Like, so you're going to pick up on some of the elements, but not all of them, and sort of as you get older and you reread things, you pick up on more and different things. So it is interesting. But yeah, I had students sign up who have never read them, who have like read one but didn't continue, who have seen like one or two movies but didn't read them, or and a number of people, and there's a completionist in me that's very confused by this, but like a number of people who are like, yeah, I read like one, but I didn't keep going, or I saw like one movie, but not. I'm like, how? But
with Susan Collins chapter endings, how?
Yeah. But yeah, so a real mix of people. So like from very hardcore fans, and so but also people who really loved them in middle school, but then haven't like returned to them in a while as well. So people who have very fond memories of their investment in the story at the time of the movies and that kind of stuff, but haven't sort of picked it up again recently.
Another question off of like the students, I guess, is at some point in the semester your students do a presentation. Have there been any interpretations that have surprised you or found particularly interesting?
Yeah, I mean, so they by and large in the presentations don't really kind of interpret the books, but they think about and explain to the class something that can be kind of connected to them. A couple of my favorite ones have been from actually students who were born or grew up abroad. So I had a student from Chile talk about the 2011 Chilean student revolution, which was really fascinating. And it was something that he was clearly extremely passionate about and had a lot of kind of insider knowledge about how things had gone.
Right. Wow.
And we really, I think, I'll speak for myself, but probably also for the other students, just sort of didn't know anything about it, right? So it was just really interesting. Another, I had a couple of Chinese students talk about the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which definitely has a more oppressive aspect. It sounds like sounds like a revolution, but it was really actually quite anti-intellectual and anti-elite, and so a lot of people were very harmed, as opposed to the Chilean student revolution, which was sort of more like, I guess, what we think about in a sort of positive sense of a revolution. I've really enjoyed hearing from people about other locations and social and political movements that connect with that. So those have been really fun. I also had a student talk about parasocial relationships, which I had not heard of before, which are these sort of one-sided relationships that people have with like celebrities or characters or people in reality shows. The sort of identification with and just sort of deep investment in the lives of people who do not know them in return, right? Along the lines of thinking about the Hunger Games as a reality sort of television show. Anyway, that was a fascinating one where I learned a lot. So yeah, I mean, the students are great at coming up with really interesting connections, and it's one of the fun parts of the class to have them think about new things that I haven't considered that can connect with the books.
You said your favorite character was Katniss. So how would you say that this character is a representation of our contemporary society? And how would you describe the character as one of the themes that you learn in class? I mean, I guess you kind of talked about Katniss.
I mean, I think Katniss is a great character. And the reason I think this is the correct answer is because I think if, you write a book, you write a series of books, 3 books that are all from the point of view of a young female character,
right?
She should be the star of her own story. You should have like Katniss as your favorite character, and then you can choose like your favorite non-Katniss character. But anyway, that's why the right answer. But anyway, so I think that I love her character because of how unromantic she is. I mean, and not just talking about sort of romance in the sort of love kind of pair sense, but just like, she really sees the world very practically and isn't sort of, wearing rose-colored glasses. In so much of the books, she's not very interested in things other than her own survival and the survival of her family, which is, to be fair, a full-time occupation, right? It's not.
Yeah. She works hard at it.
Yeah. It's not that she's selfish in this way, but so I think she's really interesting in kind of being wrapped up in her own survival, and that of her family, but then also kind of coming to a sort of political consciousness about it. So, really kind of learning how her difficulty in surviving and other people's difficulty in surviving is, sort of linked up, in these different ways to the political system. So I think, so she has this sort of, process of kind of making these connections between her own circumstances and those difficulties and sort of larger systems, which I think, many people experience. And I think that, that really drives, social movements as people, who are struggling in their daily lives start to make connections between those sort of daily struggles and the sort of the systems that create those. So I think I like that she does that. And then I also really think, and I think Collins, it talks about going between war footage and reality television, late at night and being inspired to write the book. I think we're in this ever more so from when she was, when originally writing them, in this place where people who stand for sort of revolution or change or protest or something like that, sort of take on this particular quality, this sort of mythical quality, but then also people are seeking to kind of knock them down, or the way that people kind of come to be symbols of a movement, but also are imperfect. And the way that their actions can also be sort of co-opted and used sort of against their intentions. So, and even, and she talks about this not only in terms of, how Snow is attempting to manipulate her, but also how, how Coing is manipulating her and, and what District 13 expects from her and those kinds of things. So I think that possibility of, sort of drawing attention and, making people see something that's going on, but also all the sort of forces that are trying to use your symbolism in particular ways and your own questions about kind of what kind of symbol you want to be, or whether you want to be a symbol at all. Right? I mean, she really, in many ways,
which Coin does that so well. I think she has a line in the movie too, like she's mythic. Like
Yeah.
she knows how to
Yeah.
use Katniss.
Katniss has moments where she really sees this power in herself and is interested in using it, but she also, I mean, she has specific tasks she wants to do. She wants to go and kill Snow, right? She's not, and it doesn't matter so much to her, what film gets taken while this is happening. She's just, so she has her sort of own goals and reasons for things. But other people are sort of constantly, sort of trying to manipulate her image. And I feel like this really just speaks to, especially what can happen through social media, sound bites and other kinds of things, and just really quick takes on things, that really don't sort of capture their complexity. And this again is why I like Mockingjay. Her journey can really, I think, speak a lot to us about not only during the revolution but after the revolution, and how do you stay on track and how do you avoid revolutionary energies being sort of put, diverted in certain ways. And I think all that stuff is really important as we sort of think about different kinds of protests. I think it's a real struggle. Like, how do you keep focused on what on the change you're trying to bring about without other people kind of being able to kind of co-opt that, right?
If anything, I agree with you that the trilogy has become even more relevant. I feel like it needs to be something that people read. I have a theory. I mean, I've always thought when I first read Ballad when it came out, I was like, what's the point that we're writing from? Well, she writes in the third person. So, I mean, we do follow Snow, but it's not like we're in his head. But I was like having such a hard time with why do we need this? And I think looking back at it, the opening page of Ballad includes quotes from Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Rousseau, Mary Shelley. And I think after rereading that book, and here's me again trying to maybe press you to read it, I just think that with the fandom being so big as it was when the movies came out, we kind of ignored a lot of the social issues that it reflects in society, and we more so acted as capital citizens being excited by the games. Because I mean, you mentioned Mockingjay not being a fan favorite, mostly because people were upset, like, where's the action, where's the excitement, the games? And I just think from like my perspective is that we acted like the capital citizens, and we needed this book to kind of put into perspective that there's deeper meanings that we need to look into. So that's why I really admire your course and what I'm hearing about it, because I just think everything is becoming more and more relevant. Like, it already was relevant, but as time goes on, I think it's aging really well. Really kind of scary.
And I think the reason for that is probably, the level of research and the layers that Collins did in sort of putting this together. It's not just based in sort of an imagined dystopic future, it's also based in the actual past and the sort of forms oppression have taken, and in the present and the sort of reality television focus and that kind of thing. So I feel like she's created these real layers so that it's not, it doesn't feel detached at all from our current circumstances. I really appreciate the care as an author that she took in building this world with all these things behind it, right? With all the sense of the history of Appalachia, or the history of slavery, or any of these kinds of things in mind, or the the sort of history of wars and conflicts and political manipulation and all these kinds of, and these and the way that even District 13 in sort of surviving also kind of gives into a sort of particular kind of authoritarian kind of structure, even as they sort of successfully resist the capital. So anyway, I think I think a lot of credit to her as an author for really basing this on reality, even while imagining a future that has not arrived. It's also fascinating to me, because it's so much in the background. The whole problem is about environmental collapse, right, and the loss of landmass. Like, this is what has sort of
like what created what led to Panem.
So I mean, so if that's only more of an issue with every passing minute. I think she just really did a great job of constructing it in a way that's not disconnected from reality, even though it takes place in a future that has not occurred.
I have heard a lot of, like you're saying, in middle school, kids first reading the Hunger Games, high school, that's a text that teachers use. but why is The Hunger Games a great series to teach at a college level?
I think it's great at the college level because yeah, it really allows you to sort of take it deeper and read these other, a lot of related texts that, talk about a lot of related problems. And so I think there's a lot of freedom. And because I think it's so rich in themes, it's not just something where you have to sort of talk about a particular theme and that's kind of all it's good for. It really, it opens up on a lot of different ideas. It pairs really well with texts that I definitely wouldn't, assign in high school, like, Judith Butler, Gender Trouble, or, Foucault, like I mentioned before, talking about power, or, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Like these are all, definitely more college level texts, but they really get at these themes, and so I think, for us, or for me at least, it's not a question of a sort of literary analysis of the book, because it is ultimately written to be a young adult book, so it's not trying in its language to do something terribly complex. Its ideas are very complex, but it's not, so it's less, I think, about sort of dissecting different lines or word choices, but much more, for me at least, about the sort of the political and social ideas. And so I think it's college students are really ready, I think, to talk about those things, and they're really ready to grapple with the texts that allow you to think through these things. And you can read a little bit of Hobbes, who is writing in like the 16th century, so it's not an easy read. The language is challenging. You can look at these different texts that are complex, and in so doing, you see how complex and layered the trilogy is. And I think that, certainly some of that definitely you could get to with high school students, but I think college students have sort of even more power to really kind of think through those things, and make those connections. And it's also really nice to be able to give them a lot of freedom to again, do presentations and choose their own paper topics, and just kind of decide what matters to them.
Yeah, definitely.
I love the idea of now people are reading these books younger and younger, like 11, 12, 13. Then there's this period of time that passes, and then they get to college and can revisit these stories and look at them in a completely new way.
Yeah, and I think students do kind of comment on that, like, wow, I really didn't think about all this stuff back when I was reading it in middle school. It's very fun. It's a really fun way to deal with really serious stuff, right? So and that's, I think, what also is very impressive about the series, is that it can deal with so much very serious stuff and still be entertaining, occasionally funny, and not only because, although I think Collins deliberately sort of turns us into these spectators and asks us to kind of be troubled by our own spectatorship, but it's entertaining for other reasons too. I think she the relationships that people have, and different characters like Joanna or Finnick, or they bring fun dialogue and kind of witty discussions.
Right.
Although their own really tragic backstories as well. But I think she does a great job of making it entertaining to read, but also presenting themes that really stick with you and are challenging and not easily digested. Like it takes a long time to really kind of think through them.
So, final question, if you could boil it down to one thing that you would want your students to take away from your Hunger Games class, what would it be?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, I'm happy for them to sort of take away what they want in certain ways, but I do sometimes ask them near the end what they think is sort of the moral of the stories, if they think there's sort of one overarching moral. And my answer to it is what I think Collins does is shows that violence always has a cost, and it's not that it's not necessary, right? So I don't think she's saying therefore always pacifism, but she's saying like some violence is necessary, but it's never without a cost, right? So that for me, and violence here is not just the violence of the revolution, it's very much the violence of the oppression. But yeah, it all has a cost. The revolutionary violence, the oppressive violence, and it may be necessary, but it's never, people are traumatized. It's clear at the end that although Peeta and Katniss have found a way to live with their trauma, like it's not gone by any means. So many wonderful characters, die in the course of things, and I think if I had to pick my favorite non-Katniss character, it might be Cinna, who also comes to a bad end, but also, but really is committed to a cause. You just have a lot of different people committed to a cause, but also, just recognizing that there's not going to be an easy way out of the situation that they're in, and it may involve violence, and that violence may, may go beyond what can be controlled. So for me, that's I think what Collins does really well, is to think about those trade-offs and how we think about making them, and how we know when it's worth sacrifice or worth possible negative consequences.
I love that. I feel like that's what really Suzanne was going for, as well as her overarching message for the series, and she did it so well, even though I think she has the attitude of, take what you will from her books as well.
Yeah, I think authors find that they don't control their books as much as they might have thought they would at the beginning. Their characters also have minds of their own, but then you don't, you can't control what people get from it, but you can, create a really rich and layered world that allows for a lot of people to get a lot of different things out of it.
Thank you again. This was a huge honor to have you on our podcast. We haven't had an episode like this. So,
cool.
I mean, we spend our Monday nights with our other Hunger Games friends, just having a live chat about we read different chapters from the books. And so it's awesome. But to hear it from an academic setting is really, really interesting, especially one that's not middle school. But we really, really, truly appreciate you coming on here. Thank you so much.
It's really fun for me. I really like to talk and think about the books. And like I said, I haven't been able to teach it since about 2020. So it was really fun to kind of get back to it. And who knows? Maybe I'm going to read the prequel now. It could happen.
Hope you don't hate it.
And in the meantime, until you have your other class back, we have a group of friends. If you want, we'll submit papers to you. You can grade it. Thank you so much. And for those of you that are listening, we will see you again in 2 weeks. And don't forget to join us tomorrow night for Trivia Talk.
See ya.
Thank you.